still remember the faint smell of pine as I stepped onto the cracked driveway leading up to a modest one-story house. The estate sale sign, written in looping black cursive, leaned against the mailbox, as though it had lost the strength to remain upright. Even before I opened my car door, I sensed there was a quiet hush around the place. It felt like a tribute to a life that had passed, a lingering presence in the neatly trimmed hedges and the wind chimes tinkling in a soft breeze. I was there because I'd seen a tiny advertisement in the local paper about vintage clothes and furniture being sold off. Rarely did I attend these sales, but something about the notice pulled me in that morning. I parked along the curb, noticing only a handful of vehicles nearby. The hush extended into the yard, where a few people milled about, clutching small pieces of decorative art, old lamps, and books with yellowed pages. I nodded a greeting to a man carrying a wooden coat rack, but he barely glanced at me as he hurried to his truck. I walked through the open front door, stepping carefully over the threshold into a living room packed with boxes and antique furniture. The walls were lined with family photographs, some in color, some in black and white, each representing memories that someone was now forced to set aside. An older woman in a light blue cardigan seemed to be supervising the sale. I noticed the exhaustion beneath her friendly smile. Perhaps the weight of handling her late sister's belongings had taken its toll. She introduced herself as Ms. Bradley, her voice polite. I nodded, returning the greeting quietly. Other buyers drifted from one room to another, picking up small knickknacks, old records, or embroidered napkins. It had the feel of a museum that was being dismantled one piece at a time. I wandered through the living room, then the short hallway, drawn into a cluttered spare bedroom where racks of clothing stood like silent soldiers. One rack had a few formal dresses shielded in plastic covers, the type you might see at a vintage boutique. My eyes skimmed them, pale pink lace from the 1960s, a few floral patterns from the 70s, and then stopped on a dress, emerald green, that practically glimmered despite the dull lighting. It looked pristine for something from the 1950s. The fabric was smooth, heavier than modern synthetics, and the beading around the neckline caught the light. I couldn't resist lifting the plastic cover, curious about the details. It had a fitted bodice that would accentuate a person's torso in an elegant way, flaring at the waist into a graceful skirt that hinted at gatherings and dances from long ago. I tried to imagine someone moving in that dress, perhaps sipping cocktails at a swanky bar, or laughing under the glow of hanging lanterns at a summertime party. "You have good taste," came a voice from the doorway. It was Ms. Bradley, still wearing that gently worn smile. That one was my sister's favorite. She rested a hand on the doorframe as if to steady herself. Margaret bought it in 1956, I believe. She wore it to birthdays, holidays, weddings, just about any special event. I let the plastic cover fall back in place, worried I might appear too eager. "It's beautiful," I said, feeling strangely self-conscious. "Your sister must have really cherished it." "She did," Ms. Bradley replied. "She always insisted on wearing something bright. Said a splash of color reminded her to find bits of happiness, even when she felt down." I sensed a certain reverence in her tone. "I'm sorry for your loss," I offered quietly, unsure if it was the right thing to say in that moment. She nodded. "Thank you. Margaret would have been glad someone is even considering it. Dresses were her way of lighting up a room." We both fell silent. Then Ms. Bradley cleared her throat. "I'm letting it go for much less than it's probably worth, but I want it to go to someone who'll love it as much as she did." I tried to imagine the typical buyer for such a piece, perhaps a vintage fashion collector or someone who loved retro dances. Yet there I was, a 29-year-old man feeling an odd pull toward this exact dress. The urge was so unexpected that I briefly tried to talk myself out of it. "Maybe you're just tired," I thought. "Or maybe you just appreciate the craftsmanship." Still, the color drew me in like an invitation I couldn't refuse. I took a breath and met Ms. Bradley's gaze. "I'd like to buy it." Her eyebrows flicked up, but her voice stayed calm. "Well, I'm sure Margaret would be happy to see it go to someone who seems so taken by it." Her lack of judgment relieved me. I worried she might quiz me or even question why I wanted the dress. Instead, she folded it neatly into a garment bag, handled the transaction quickly, and that was it. I offered to carry it out myself. She said nothing else as she handed me the bag, though I saw a faint hint of curiosity in her eyes, as if she wanted to know more about my reasons. But if she had questions, she kept them to herself. I left that house with the garment bag draped over my arm, conscious of the fact that I was carrying something that wasn't exactly part of my usual wardrobe. Back at my small apartment, a one-bedroom space with neutral-colored walls and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen, I placed the garment bag in my closet. Then I almost laughed at how odd it looked, hanging there among my jackets, polos, and a few casual button-down shirts. The emerald green peeking out of the protective plastic was like a secret whisper of flamboyance among an otherwise ordinary row of clothing. In the weeks that followed, I mostly forgot about it. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of that vibrant color as I grabbed a jacket, and it would stir some quiet sense of longing in me. But I had other things to worry about. My job was stressful. I worked at a small tech company that demanded late hours and a never-ending stream of conference calls. I had recently come out of a difficult relationship, so my evenings at home were usually spent scrolling aimlessly through social media or watching old TV shows alone, feeling a vague sadness that I couldn't quite name. Maybe 2 months passed before I finally took the dress out of the closet. It was a stormy night, the kind where rain pelted the windows like insistent fingertips and thunder rumbled in the distance. I'd had a bad day at work. I'd snapped at my boss, who'd snapped right back, leaving me feeling on edge for the rest of the afternoon. By the time I got home, I was emotionally drained. I put my keys on the kitchen counter, stared into my fridge, which offered nothing but leftover takeout and a half-empty carton of milk, and sighed deeply. Then my eyes traveled to the closet door in the hallway. The memory of that emerald dress returned, its brilliance in the dim room at the estate sale, the way Miss Bradley had spoken about Margaret's joy. A strange desire arose in me to look at it again, just to hold it and remember something that felt like optimism. I turned on a small lamp in the living room and retrieved the garment bag. The zipper made a quiet hiss as I opened it. In the golden lamplight, the dress looked even more striking than I recalled. I felt a slight tremor in my chest, a flutter of nerves. There was no one else around, no prying eyes, no judgments. So I slipped out of my work clothes and carefully pulled the dress over my head, inching the zipper up as far as I could reach. The fabric slid along my skin, cool and smooth. The bodice hugged my torso gently, and the skirt had more volume than I'd expected, falling to about mid-calf. Stepping in front of the mirror in my hallway, I felt my cheeks warm. It looked outlandish on me, of course. I was no runway model, and the dress was tailored for a different body shape. Yet the color was undeniably enchanting. I found myself turning slightly, watching the skirt swirl around my legs. My hair, normally just combed in a simple way for work, fell a bit messily over my forehead, but that disarray almost added to the sense that I was stepping into someone else's dream for a moment. A strange but calming wave of emotion washed over me. I wondered who Margaret was, what kind of happiness she must have felt when she wore this. Her sister had said she loved bright colors because they helped her hold on to pieces of joy. I let that sink in. Clothes carry memories, emotions. Maybe it wasn't so odd to feel connected to a garment, especially one that had been worn for so many celebrations. In that moment, standing there with the rain hammering the windows, I felt as though Margaret's joy and confidence drifted in the air around me. My reflection in the mirror seemed to say, "Here you are, weathered by your own troubles, but still standing, still seeking something that might bring a moment of light." I stayed like that for a while, just letting the hush of the room wrap around me. My heart beat steadily, and though my mind kept wondering if this was odd or foolish, a part of me felt calm. Eventually, I changed back into my clothes and returned the emerald dress to its bag. I didn't yet know what all this meant, only that, for the first time in months, I felt more at peace than I had in a long while. The next day, I woke early, prepared myself for work, and tried to file away the previous night's experience. I told myself it was just a passing moment of relief after a bad day, but something had shifted in me. I spent the day thinking about the feeling of wearing that dress. The memory of it would sneak up on me between meetings, and I felt a little zing of anticipation in my chest every time. After work, I contemplated putting it on again, but I was oddly timid about it, as though repeating the experience might diminish its allure. Instead, I cooked a meager dinner and told myself that was enough excitement for the day. Yet by the weekend, the draw was back. On Saturday night, after a solitary dinner, I closed the curtains against the city lights outside, turned on some old jazz on my speaker, and gently lifted the emerald dress out of the closet again. This time, I spent longer in front of the mirror. My reflection was still a bit jarring. I was a fairly average guy in my late 20s wearing a vintage cocktail dress, but I also felt a subtle confidence stirring. Perhaps it was the color, the cut of the dress, the music, or the memory of the woman who used to wear it. Regardless, for that hour in my apartment, I didn't worry about whether it was normal or expected. I let the gentle sway of the skirt make me feel as though the simple act of dressing up could bring me some measure of solace. I drifted into the living room, enjoying the swish of fabric around my legs. My laptop was open on the coffee table, and it struck me how odd this must appear from the outside. Just me in an old dress, the dull glow of the lamp, the hum of the refrigerator. But it also felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. I'd been so lost in stress, heartbreak, and the gray grind of daily life that I'd forgotten what it meant to smile at a small indulgence. That night, I fell asleep with a gentle sense of comfort. The dress was back in its bag, but its presence lingered. Over the next few weeks, it became something of a quiet ritual for me. On nights when the loneliness felt too heavy, or the burdens of work pushed me to the brink, I'd slip into the emerald dress and simply exist in my own home. No theatrics, no audience, just me, letting the color, the texture, and the mysterious link to Margaret's past lift my spirits. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror again and saw I was smiling. It wasn't a forced, polite grin. It was soft, sincere, like greeting an old friend you hadn't realized you missed. I thought of Miss Bradley's words, that Margaret wore it for every celebration. In a small way, I felt I was celebrating too. Celebrating having survived a tumultuous time in my life. Celebrating moments of quiet that let me recenter. I never dared leave the house in it. That felt like a step too large. But within my own walls, I allowed myself this small reprieve. Eventually, life carried on, as it does. Work demanded more of me, and my social circle, though limited, occasionally asked me to join them for dinner or a weekend activity. One friend, Jill, was especially persistent. We'd been close since college, and though we didn't talk daily, she could always tell when I was drifting into a funk. Jill was 30, with a quick wit and a boundless capacity to pick up on the nuances of my mood. After nearly 2 months of sporadic phone calls where I kept the cross-dressing to myself, Jill finally decided we needed a night in. She texted that she was coming over with groceries and a couple of movies. I agreed, mostly because I could use the company, but also with a creeping anxiety about the dress in my closet. Part of me worried she might stumble across it and have questions. Another part of me was strangely curious how she would react if she found out. The night Jill arrived, she was wearing a casual sweater and jeans, her hair tied in a loose ponytail. She bustled in with bags of groceries and teased me about the state of my fridge. While she busied herself in the kitchen, I hovered in the living room, trying not to betray how nervous I was. Once she set a pot of pasta boiling and placed a pre-baked pie in the oven, she plopped down on my couch. "All right," she said, brushing her hands on her knees. "Are you going to tell me what's up with you, or am I just going to guess?" I blinked, turning off the TV I'd been scrolling through. "What do you mean?" She gave me that knowing look. "You've been oddly quiet for months, yet you don't seem as depressed as you usually get after a breakup. Something's different. You smile more but also seem guarded. What's the story?" I shrugged, not sure how to respond. My eyes flicked toward the closed closet door. "I've just been staying busy," I said, catching myself before using certain words that might give everything away. Her gaze followed mine. "Why are you staring at the closet?" I swallowed, feeling that wave of nerves tighten my throat. Jill was intuitive. I knew she wouldn't let this go. "It's nothing," I said a bit too quickly. She stared at me, unconvinced. Then a playful glint lit her eyes. "Are you hiding a new pet in there? Did you get a cat and not tell me?" Her tone was light, but it carried the determination of someone who intended to get answers. "No," I said, letting out an awkward laugh. "Not exactly." She crossed her arms, waiting. I could almost see the thoughts racing behind her eyes. In a moment of impulsiveness, I said, "Look, you have to promise not to make this weird." She raised both eyebrows. Now I'm definitely intrigued. Standing up, I moved to the closet, pulled open the door, and lifted the garment bag out. Jill's expression grew puzzled. "Is that a suit?" she asked. Then I gently unzipped the bag to reveal the emerald dress. I kept my eyes on the swirling pattern of the carpet while she took in the sight. There was a beat of silence before she spoke, quieter now. "It's gorgeous, very old school. Where did you get it?" For a moment I was flooded with relief. She hadn't laughed or recoiled. "An estate sale," I said, my voice dropping. "Belonged to a woman named Margaret. She wore it to all her special events. It kind of caught my eye." Jill looked at me with curiosity. "Huh. Did you buy it as a collector's piece or something?" I felt my pulse thrum in my ears. "Not exactly," I said carefully. I wear it sometimes. At home. It's comforting in a way. Please don't judge me." She did a slow blink, taking that in. Then she set her elbows on her knees, leaning forward. "I'm not judging you," she said, her voice sincere. "But I have to ask, does it make you happy?" I nodded, struggling to find the right words. "It does. It's like wearing it lets me step away from all the stuff that weighs me down. I'm not trying to be anyone else. It just feels good." Jill's eyes shone with empathy. "Okay. Well, I've known you for over a decade. This surprises me, but I'm not upset or anything. If it helps you, then who am I to say otherwise?" I felt some tension uncoil in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. "I was worried you'd think I was losing my mind." She chuckled softly. "No, you're not losing your mind. We all have things that bring comfort. Some people collect figurines, some people keep old diaries, some people wear vintage dresses. It's not hurting anyone." That evening, we ate dinner and watched a movie. Jill asked a few curious questions, but more in a thoughtful than interrogating way. She seemed mostly concerned about how I felt, rather than whether it was normal. I saw a glimmer of relief that I was letting her into this vulnerable place. After she left, I realized how fortunate I was to have a friend who didn't flinch at something so unconventional in my life. It gave me a quiet confidence, though I still kept the dress wearing as a private ritual. My daily routine stayed the same: wake up, work, come home. But now there was a layer of quiet boldness under it all, as though a door inside me had opened and a new breeze was drifting through. A few weeks later, I got a voicemail from Miss Bradley. Her voice was gentle on the recording, saying she hoped I was well, and that, if I was ever curious, she had a few boxes of her sister's old keepsakes I might want to look at. Margaret had quite a collection of photos, diaries, and jewelry, Miss Bradley said. I'm clearing out the attic and thought you might like to see if there's anything else you want. No pressure. Just let me know. I stood in my living room for a while, listening to the message twice. It was unexpected that she would reach out. I hadn't even realized she'd kept my phone number, though I'd probably left it when I wrote a check for the dress at the estate sale. Something in her message intrigued me. Maybe I wanted to know more about the woman whose dress I'd grown so attached to. That weekend, I returned her call and arranged to visit. Miss Bradley's house felt different now without the bustle of the estate sale. I parked in the same spot as before. The front yard was quieter, and the windows looked out at me with familiarity, as though they recognized a returning guest. Ms. Bradley opened the door wearing a thick cardigan, and she greeted me with a kind, if somewhat tired, smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, ushering me into the living room. It was less cluttered now. Some of the furniture was gone, and I could see the imprint on the carpet where a heavy coffee table might have been. On the couch sat a few boxes sealed with tape. She gestured for me to sit in an old armchair next to the door. "How have you been?" she asked once we were settled. I hesitated, not wanting to overshare. "I've been all right," I said, then decided to be brave. I really like the dress. I realize that's an odd statement, but I do appreciate having it." She studied me for a moment. "I'm glad. Some items are just meant to find the right person." Then she patted one of the cardboard boxes. Margaret had a whole closet of clothing and keepsakes. I managed to sell or donate most of it, but these are some personal things I set aside in case someone wanted to learn more about her or keep them as mementos. You mentioned you were interested in the dress's background, so I thought maybe you'd find something else that connected with you. I started looking through one box, rummaging carefully. There were photos of Margaret in her younger years, smiling in polka dot dresses, wearing large sunglasses, or standing alongside friends at what looked like a lively dance. Another folder contained newspaper clippings of local events from decades prior. I paused when I saw a black and white photo of Margaret wearing what had to be the emerald dress. The photo was a bit faded, but I recognized the shape of it, the neckline, and the subtle glimmer of the beads. "She loved that dress," Ms. Bradley said with a hint of nostalgia. "When she put it on, it was like she could face anything. You could see her posture change. It gave her confidence." I nodded, holding the photo gingerly, thinking of how that sentiment was exactly what I felt sometimes. "She looks happy," I observed. "Where was this picture taken?" "That was at a friend's wedding reception, I believe, late 1950s. It might have been at a fancy hall downtown. She told me that night was one of the best she'd ever had. She danced until her feet ached." I sifted through more items. A small journal filled with quick notes about parties Margaret attended, postcards from a distant cousin, and a few costume jewelry pieces that sparkled in the light. Ms. Bradley encouraged me to take anything I found meaningful. In one photo, Margaret stood with a group of women in front of an old movie theater. She held a bag of popcorn and wore a look of pure delight. The photo made me smile. At some point, Ms. Bradley sighed. I miss her. Even though we argued sometimes, she was my sister. She had a spark. She faced her struggles, had her share of heartbreak, but she always found a way to keep that spark alive. I think it helped that she wasn't afraid to stand out, whether that was wearing bright colors or speaking her mind. I listened quietly. That glimmer in Ms. Bradley's voice reminded me how important Margaret had been in her life. Though I'd never met Margaret, I felt a growing admiration for who she was. I felt almost like I was getting to know a distant friend, someone whose belongings and spirit now dwelled partly with me. By the time I was done looking through the boxes, I'd set aside a couple of photographs, especially the black and white one of Margaret in the emerald dress. I also kept a small brooch shaped like a leaf, which Ms. Bradley said Margaret often wore pinned to her coat. Ms. Bradley insisted I take them as gifts. I'm really happy to see someone appreciate Margaret the way I did, she said softly. We spoke a while longer about Margaret's life, how she'd been independent-minded for her era, how she'd traveled around the country when it wasn't as common for women to do so alone. Ms. Bradley shared tales of her sister's sense of humor, how she'd crack jokes even during serious moments. I left that afternoon with a deeper sense of who Margaret was. The gratitude I felt extended not just for the dress, but for the insight into a life lived with gusto. Back home, I tucked the photos and the brooch into a small wooden box of my own, one I used to keep sentimental items. Over the next weeks, whenever I wore the emerald dress, I found myself thinking of Margaret's energy, the memories Ms. Bradley had shared. I imagined Margaret swirling around dance floors, tossing witty remarks around dinner tables, and wearing her confidence on her sleeve. I couldn't help feeling that wearing her beloved dress connected me in a quiet way to that same intangible spark. One Friday night, after a particularly challenging week, I slipped on the dress and fastened the leaf brooch at the shoulder. Standing in front of my mirror, I realized how this small addition made the dress feel even more complete, like it belonged not just to me, but to the story woven through its threads. I put on some soft music. In the low light of my living room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection and thought, I see you. Not who you're supposed to be, not who the world demands you to be, but just you. I turned off the music when I realized Jill was calling me. She sometimes checked up on me on Fridays, especially if she suspected I was down. I accepted the video call, forgetting in that moment that I was still wearing the dress. Her face popped up on my phone screen with a cheerful grin, and then her eyes widened when she registered what I had on. "Oh," she exclaimed. "Looks like I caught you at a fun time." I felt a rush of embarrassment, but then I reminded myself that Jill had seen the dress before. "Yeah, I was just unwinding." She smiled knowingly. "You look surprisingly at ease. Good for you." Then her face grew serious. "Hey, I've got a question. How would you feel about coming out for dinner with me and a couple of friends tomorrow night? Just a small place we love downtown. A new restaurant opened up, and we want to try it. You've been cooped up, and it might be nice to get out." My stomach flipped at the thought of socializing in a large group. "I don't know," I said cautiously. "I've been pretty busy and—" "Stop. You can spare a night." She arched an eyebrow. "Daniel, I promise you'll enjoy it. Maybe it's time to let yourself have a bit of fun. We won't stay out too late." I hesitated, still acutely aware of the dress hugging my frame. "All right," I finally said. "I'll come." "Perfect. I'll message you the address. And hey," she added with a small grin, "the fact that you look so comfortable right now, it means you're finding something that helps you cope. But don't hide away forever." With that, she ended the call. I looked around my apartment, feeling a lingering tension in my shoulders. The idea of going out and facing people was daunting, especially since I'd been living in a quiet bubble of vintage fabric and personal reflection. But Jill was right. I couldn't hide here every weekend. When Saturday arrived, I met Jill at a cozy little bistro downtown. She was with two friends, Mark and Olivia, both of whom I'd hung out with casually in the past. The place had low lighting, candles on each table, and soft music playing. It smelled of fresh bread and something sweet, maybe caramelized onions. We settled into a corner booth. Conversation flowed about work, the local art scene, random anecdotes from Mark's day. I found myself actually enjoying their company, surprised at how normal it felt. They asked me how I'd been. I gave general answers about staying busy at work, reading some books, and puttering around my apartment. Jill's eyes met mine at one point, and I saw a gentle understanding pass between us. She didn't mention the dress, or the fact that my private life had shifted in an unexpected direction. She gave me my space, and for that I was grateful. As dinner progressed, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in public for a while. The memory of wearing the emerald dress the night before flashed in my mind, but it didn't make me anxious. It was like I had a piece of quiet confidence with me. I started cracking jokes with Mark and Olivia, sharing a funny story from work. We lingered over dessert, a rich chocolate ganache that we split 4 ways, and I realized how comforting it was to laugh in the presence of others, to feel included and alive. It was nearly 11 when we stepped out onto the sidewalk. Jill gave me a hug goodnight, and Mark and Olivia waved as they headed to their car. Jill and I strolled to ours. The city lights glowed on the wet pavement, reflecting neon pinks and blues from nearby bars and restaurants. She rubbed her arms against the cool air. "I'm happy to see you enjoying yourself." I nodded. I guess I needed this more than I realized. She paused at her car door, looking at me thoughtfully. "Would you ever consider going out wearing what you want? The dress, or something else that represents the same comfort? You don't have to hide that side of you, you know." My stomach did a small twist. "I'm not ready for that," I said softly. "It feels like something personal, and I don't know if I can handle strangers' reactions." Jill nodded. "I get that. Just don't shut the door on the possibility. You never know where life will lead you." I thanked her for the night out, and we parted ways. As I drove home, the city lights gliding past my windshield, I reflected on what she'd said. The idea of wearing the emerald dress beyond my apartment walls was daunting, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But I couldn't deny that the notion lingered in my mind. Margaret had worn it so proudly, unafraid of who might judge her. Was there some lesson in that? When I returned to my apartment, I sat in silence on my couch, letting the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rumble of late-night traffic fill the space. My phone buzzed, a text from Jill that said, "Glad you came out tonight. Sleep well." I smiled, set the phone aside, and wandered over to the closet. There it was again, that flash of emerald against the darkness of my otherwise ordinary wardrobe. I ran my hand along the fabric, feeling a surge of gratitude for a garment that had become an emotional refuge. In the months that followed, I found a steadier equilibrium. Work was still hectic, but I managed my stress more effectively, partly because I felt I had something special waiting for me at home. Jill occasionally teased me to come out wearing something fancy, but I always laughed it off. For now, I was content to keep it private. At times, I'd sit on my couch, wearing the dress while flipping through Margaret's photos. On the nights I felt particularly overwhelmed, I'd imagine her dancing freely, and that mental image would help me breathe a bit easier. One day, as winter approached, Ms. Bradley called me again. She said she was selling the house, moving to a smaller apartment closer to her daughter. "I have one last piece of Margaret's that I'd like you to have," she said. It's a pair of gloves she wore with that dress, emerald green as well, with tiny pearl-like buttons at the wrist. I agreed to stop by. Her expression was bittersweet when I saw her. She pressed the gloves into my hands with a trembling smile. You've been so kind, giving a new home to the dress she adored. Take these, please. The gloves were stunning, smooth, with an old-fashioned elegance. I thanked Ms. Bradley multiple times, feeling almost overwhelmed by her generosity. On my way out, I gave her a gentle hug. She seemed weary, perhaps from the sorrow of leaving the house she'd shared with Margaret's memory for so long. I had a feeling she appreciated knowing that at least a piece of Margaret's life would remain treasured. That night, I set the gloves beside the dress and stood a while, just staring. They completed the ensemble, as though I'd stepped into a living piece of history. I tried them on, sliding my fingers carefully into the soft interior. Looking at myself in the mirror, I gave a quiet chuckle, letting the strangeness and enchantment of the situation wash over me. Who would have guessed months ago that I'd find such a sense of calm from a vintage outfit? As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I realized how different I felt since the day I stumbled upon the estate sale. The gloom that once seemed impossible to shake had softened. I still had problems, everyone does, but there was a small flame in me now. Margaret's flame, maybe. A spark of audacity, reminding me that joy can appear in unexpected forms, and we don't always have to justify it to the world. When spring arrived, Jill proposed another group outing, this time to a local cultural festival known for its lively parades and artisan stalls. She said we'd walk around, admire crafts, grab street food, and enjoy the mild weather. The festival was famously colorful, with people dressed in all sorts of bright outfits. Even so, the idea of wearing a 1950s cocktail dress among the crowd felt like too big a leap. I settled for my usual jeans and a light jacket. Walking through the festival was a delight. The city blocked off several streets, and lines of booths offered handcrafted jewelry, paintings, and cuisine from different cultures. I sipped a fruity drink as Jill and I strolled between displays of ceramics and hand-woven textiles. Mark and Olivia soon wandered off to watch a folk dance performance. Jill leaned in, pointing to a booth that sold retro accessories. We browsed through old hats, gloves, and scarves. My mind flicked to the gloves Miss Bradley had given me. Jill found a crimson scarf she liked and joked, "I'll get this, and you get something else vintage. Match your taste for old-school charm." She winked. I laughed, scanning the booth. Part of me was tempted by a short capelet made of deep blue velvet, but I decided against it. I felt at peace just knowing I had the emerald dress at home. The sense of private contentment was enough that day. Later, while we were munching on fried treats, Jill turned to me, her eyes scanning the crowd. "You see all these people wearing bright colors, flamboyant costumes, mixing styles. Everyone is just enjoying themselves, and hardly anyone is paying too much attention to what others are wearing. I think that's pretty great." I squinted at the milling crowd, noticing a teenager in rainbow suspenders, an older man in a straw hat decorated with flowers, a pair of college students wearing matching jumpsuits. They were all just living in the moment, unbothered by onlookers. A subtle pang of longing tightened my chest, but I brushed it aside. It was enough for me to know I had my own version of freedom at home. At sunset, we left the festival, and I said my goodbyes, heading back to my apartment. The sky glowed in oranges and pinks as I drove. When I got home, I immediately went to my closet and pulled out the dress. Something about the festival made me want to slip into that softness again, to honor the quiet expression it gave me. I put on some gentle music, coaxing my mind back to a calm place. As the notes drifted through my apartment, I let myself sway a bit, as though slow dancing with the memory of Margaret. The fabric swirled around me, and I felt a warmth in my chest. The rummaging for meaning after my breakup and the stress of my job seemed more bearable. There would always be uncertainties in life, but I had found a small oasis of comfort that reminded me I could still be tender with myself. Time passed, bringing changes both small and large. I found a better job opportunity elsewhere, left the tech company, and started to feel a renewed sense of optimism. Jill and I grew closer in our friendship, and she confided her own fears and dreams. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, the emerald dress was there, a reminder that solace could be found in unexpected places. As for Ms. Bradley, she moved into her new apartment across town, and we occasionally spoke on the phone. She seemed to be doing well, adjusting to a quieter life. I once mustered the courage to tell her, in vague terms, that Margaret's dress continued to mean a great deal to me. She simply said, "I believe it. Margaret's clothes always did have a certain magic. I'm happy you found it." And with that, we both understood. Neither of us needed further details. The unspoken truth was that I was honoring her sister's memory, keeping a spark alive in my own modest way. On one of our final calls, Miss Bradley told me she'd found an invitation to an anniversary ball from decades ago. Margaret's name was on the guest list. "I think she wore the emerald dress that night," Miss Bradley reminisced. "It was at some fancy place downtown. She called me afterward, bubbling over with stories of the big band playing, the crowd toasting champagne, and how that dress made her feel like royalty." Hearing that, I remembered the swirl of satin around my legs and that intangible sense of empowerment it granted me in my quiet hours. It wasn't about flaunting it in public or proving anything to anyone. It was about having a private connection to something that once lit up a woman's life and now quietly lit up mine. As another year slipped by, I found myself reflecting on how the simplest items, a green cocktail dress, a pair of gloves, an old photo, could change a person's perspective. The act of wearing that dress remained a sacred moment to me, a small but profound reminder of the resilience hidden in each of us. Whenever I felt weighed down by life's chaos, I'd open the closet, see the glimmer of emerald, and remember that there is grace in being true to oneself, even if it's away from the world's gaze. People might never understand. Maybe that was okay. Not everything in life required an audience. Some experiences are meant to be personal, a refuge where we can reconnect with who we are at our most unguarded. Every time I zipped up that dress, I felt a hush settle over me, one that blocked out the day's noise and offered a soothing hush of possibility. Whether I simply sat in my armchair or paced the apartment while music played, it filled the spaces in my heart that had grown dull. Sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine the many gatherings Margaret attended, the laughter she must have shared, the little jokes that lit up the corners of her smile. In those moments, I felt closer to her spirit. I'd see the reflection of her confidence staring back at me, urging me to hold on to the tiny joys I encountered, like a good meal with friends, a stroll in the park, a random act of kindness. Jill eventually came to see my apartment more often. We'd cook meals together or watch movies, and every once in a while she'd glance at the closet and grin. "I know it's in there," she'd say teasingly, "giving you secret superpowers." I'd grin back. "Yeah, something like that." I didn't mind the jokes. In fact, her playful acceptance touched me. When we talked about our respective goals, whether it was traveling to a new country or starting a different career path, she reminded me, "Be bold. You already know how to be bold, even if you don't realize it." I'd just smile, thinking of the emerald dress. Over time, I did consider wearing it beyond the confines of my apartment, maybe to some costume party or a private gathering with supportive friends. But each time, I hesitated. Part of me feared the stares, the questions, or the judgments from people who wouldn't understand. Another part of me felt that I didn't need external validation. I was content with the silent understanding that the dress and I shared. It was enough for me that it existed in my life as a symbol of emotional courage. Yet there was one occasion that tempted me, an invitation to a masquerade-themed event hosted by a local art collective. Costumes were encouraged, and participants were urged to dress as lavishly as possible. Jill pointed out that I could wear anything, and no one would bat an eye. "It's your chance to wear that emerald piece outside if you feel up to it," she said gently. She even offered to help me find a matching mask. For days, I wrestled with the idea. It felt like a step into uncharted territory, yet I also sensed an undeniable excitement at the thought. When the night of the masquerade came, Jill swung by my apartment with a gold-trimmed mask and a swirl of encouragement in her eyes. I had laid out the dress, the gloves, and even the brooch. My heart pounded. I tried it all on, and Jill helped smooth the fabric across my shoulders. She smiled at me in the mirror, her voice brimming with warmth. "You look amazing," she said. I stared at my reflection, the bright green, the refined shape of the gloves, the elegant brooch. Despite the mask covering part of my face, I felt unusually exposed, but I also felt a quiver of excitement. My reflection revealed a person choosing to carry a piece of someone else's confidence into the world. I took a deep breath and followed Jill out the door. We rode in a cab to the venue, which was ablaze with string lights and an array of outlandish outfits, feathered headdresses, sequined gowns, and vintage suits. The energy in the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Initially, I wanted to shrink into the shadows, but Jill held my arm reassuringly. As we stepped into the main hall, I noticed no one gave me a shocked look or a sneer. Instead, a few people complimented the rich color of the dress. A masked woman in a flowing purple gown even said, "That is a gorgeous retro piece. Where'd you find it?" And I found myself smiling as I explained it was vintage. Under the chandeliers, the music swelled, and clusters of people laughed, danced, or mingled. I stood there, feeling my pulse in my wrists, noticing how normal it felt to just be dressed this way in a setting that welcomed creativity. Jill nudged me, and we moved toward the dance floor, slipping into the swirl of color and motion. My skirt brushed against others, and I caught glimpses of elaborate masks, painted faces, and shimmering fabrics. For the first few minutes, I felt self-conscious, but gradually, as the music seeped into my bones, I let myself move to the rhythm. My gloved hands rose to the tune, and the skirt fanned gracefully around me. Jill danced nearby, smiling broadly whenever our eyes met, offering me small signals of support. I felt a rush of warmth, a sense that perhaps Margaret's spark was there too, swirling around like an invisible dancer. When the music slowed, Jill and I drifted to the edges of the hall. We sipped fruit punch and took in the spectacle of the masquerade. My heart was light. A handful of people complimented me again on the dress, and with each kind word, my anxiety melted a bit more. After a while, Jill went to say hello to someone she knew, and I found a quiet spot near a statue in the corner. A stranger with a silver mask approached. "That's quite a dress," he remarked politely, leaning on a nearby column. I braced myself for something critical, but his voice was simply appreciative. "You pull it off well." "Thank you," I managed, feeling a blush creep over my cheeks. I took a sip from my cup. We chatted briefly about the event, the music, the artistry of people's costumes. Then he excused himself, and I was left alone with a gentle glow of pride. I glanced down at the emerald folds, thinking of Margaret, and felt a wave of gratitude. This had been her favorite piece, her symbol of joyous defiance. Now I was wearing it, and people's approval, or lack thereof, couldn't change how it made me feel. In that corner, surrounded by flickering lights and laughter, I realized that even if no one else ever understood, I did. And that was enough. Eventually, Jill returned, and we danced one last time before slipping away into the night. The air outside was cool as we climbed into the cab. I settled into the seat, the rich fabric of the dress rustling softly. Jill reached over and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and happiness. Back home, I hung the dress up in my closet again, but this time it felt changed. Now it wasn't just my secret solace. It was also something I'd proudly worn, if only for a single evening, in the presence of strangers and friends alike. Margaret's beloved garment had seen another celebration, decades after her own time. Life continued its ebb and flow. I never became someone who wore vintage dresses on the street regularly, and I had no intention of making a habit of it. But once in a while, when Jill invited me to a themed party or a quirky gathering, I'd consider taking the emerald dress out in public. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. The choice was always mine, and in the privacy of my own home, it remained a constant, reliable companion. People around me changed too. Some drifted in and out of my life, but Jill stayed, an unwavering friend who never questioned the pieces of me that others might find strange. Ms. Bradley and I kept in touch until she passed away peacefully in her sleep a few years later. When I heard the news, I took the dress out, held it against me, and spent a few silent moments thinking of her and Margaret. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a profound gratitude that I'd been allowed into their family's memories. Shortly after, I tucked the black and white photo of Margaret, where she beamed in that emerald dress, into a frame. I placed it on a small table near my bedroom window, right beside a snapshot of my younger self laughing with Jill at a college event. 2 photos, 2 time periods, bridging the gap between past and present. Sometimes I'd glance at those photos in the morning light, reminded that every thread of our lives intertwines with unseen threads from other stories. Something as small as a dress can carry a legacy of celebration and courage, passing that spark to whoever embraces it next. And so I carried on. My daily life might look ordinary from the outside. I work, pay bills, see friends, but I know there's a certain emerald gleam in my closet, an echo of hope, resilience, and unexpected comfort. If life grows dark, I can slip it on, feel the gentle weight of the skirt, and stand with the memory of Margaret at my side, both of us dancing through whatever shadows lie ahead. And in that private moment, the world becomes just a little bit brighter.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.